I have learned that when a faithful dog refuses to walk away, it is usually because the truth has not finished speaking. The old cabin stands alone beneath towering pine trees in the mountains of western Montana, where cool morning mist drifts between the branches and the scent of cedar, fresh earth, and weathered timber fills the quiet air. For nearly 40 years, Ethan Walker has called this place home whenever the weight of ordinary life became too heavy to carry anywhere else. The retired United States Marine built countless memories inside its rough wooden walls alongside his late father, another veteran whose steady hands had shaped nearly every beam and floorboard decades earlier. Time has faded the paint, softened the edges of the porch, and covered the roof with patches of green moss. Yet every creaking board still carries echoes of laughter, quiet conversations, and evenings spent beside the stone fireplace while snow settled silently outside. Now, at 60 years old, Ethan has made the difficult decision to sell the cabin. The paperwork waits inside a worn leather folder on the kitchen table. A buyer from the nearby town plans to arrive tomorrow afternoon. Ethan believes it is finally time to let the past rest where it belongs. He spends the morning carefully packing old photographs, fishing gear, military keepsakes, and weathered books into neatly labeled boxes. Sunlight filters through the dusty cabin windows, creating warm golden beams that reveal tiny particles floating peacefully in the still air. Every object he touches reminds him of another season, another story, another reason leaving feels far more difficult than he expected. Across the room, Ranger quietly watches him. The black and tan German Shepherd has shared nearly every day of the past 7 years beside Ethan, rarely asking for attention and never leaving his side without reason. Calm, intelligent, and deeply observant, Ranger has always seemed to notice the smallest changes long before Ethan does. This morning feels different. Instead of following Ethan from room to room as usual, Ranger slowly walks toward the far corner of the cabin near the old stone fireplace. He lowers his nose to one narrow section of the wooden floor, sniffs carefully, then gently scratches the same floorboard with one front paw. The sound is soft but unmistakable. Ethan looks over with a faint smile. Probably another field mouse, he says quietly before returning to another storage box. Ranger does not move. A full minute passes before he scratches the exact same board again. This time he sits beside it, ears forward, eyes fixed on Ethan with calm patience rather than excitement. Ethan walks over, kneels beside him, and runs one hand through the thick fur around the dog's neck. The floorboards appear ordinary. Old pine planks, worn smooth by decades of footsteps. No unusual smell. No visible gaps. Nothing suggesting hidden animals or damaged wood. He gently taps the surface with his knuckles before standing again. "Not today, old friend," he whispers. Yet throughout the afternoon, no matter where Ethan carries another box, Ranger quietly returns to the same place beside the fireplace. Each time he scratches only once, never frantically, never barking, then patiently waits as though believing one day Ethan will finally understand what he has been trying to say. As evening settles over the mountain forest and golden light fades behind the tall pines, Ethan pauses beside the packed moving boxes and notices Ranger still sitting beside that single weathered floorboard. Suddenly, a memory rises from somewhere deep inside his childhood. His father's calm voice returns as clearly as though it had never left the cabin at all. "Son, if one day your dog asks you to stop and listen, trust him before you trust your own eyes." Sleep comes lightly inside the old cabin that night. Wind moves gently through the towering pines, brushing against the weathered walls with a soft whisper that has sounded the same for decades. The stone fireplace has long since cooled, leaving only the comforting scent of aged cedar, pine resin, and polished wood lingering in the quiet room. Ethan Walker lies awake on the narrow bed in the small upstairs loft, staring toward the ceiling while his father's words continue to echo inside his thoughts. He cannot remember when he first heard them, only that they had always remained somewhere deep within him, patiently waiting for the right moment to return. Before dawn, Ethan wakes to the familiar sound of Ranger quietly moving across the wooden floor below. He dresses slowly, pulls on his old flannel shirt, worn denim jacket, and hiking boots, then walks downstairs where pale blue morning light filters through the frosted cabin windows. Ranger is already sitting beside the same floorboard near the fireplace. His posture is relaxed, his breathing calm, yet his attention never leaves the weathered pine plank beneath his front paws. Ethan kneels once again, studying the old floor with greater patience than he had shown the day before. The board looks no different from the others surrounding it. Years of footsteps have smoothed every surface. Tiny nail heads remain firmly in place. Dust has settled naturally into the narrow seams between each plank. Nothing suggests hidden damage or recent disturbance. Ethan gently places his hand against the wood. It feels cool beneath his fingertips. He presses lightly, listening for any unusual movement. The cabin answers only with the familiar creak of aging timber settling into another mountain morning. Ranger quietly watches every movement without scratching again. It is almost as though he understands that Ethan has finally begun paying attention. Ethan stands, walks into the storage room, and returns carrying a small rubber mallet once used by his father during routine cabin repairs. He slowly taps several nearby floorboards, listening carefully to each sound. Most produce the same solid wooden tone he has known since childhood. Then he lightly taps the board Ranger has chosen. The sound is different. Not loud, not dramatic, just slightly more hollow than the surrounding floor. Ethan pauses immediately. He taps it again from another angle. Once more, the same gentle hollow note answers beneath the wood. Ranger quietly rises to his feet, takes one step closer, then calmly sits again without making a sound. Ethan's pulse quickens, though he cannot explain why. He remembers helping his father replace damaged porch boards years ago. His father had always insisted every part of the cabin be built with careful precision. There should not be empty space beneath only one section of the living room floor. Curious now, Ethan retrieves an old flashlight and shines its beam across the narrow seam surrounding the plank. Years of dust have settled evenly everywhere except for one tiny corner where the outline appears almost too straight to be natural. He gently brushes away accumulated dirt with an old paintbrush. The cleaner the surface becomes, the more clearly he notices faint tool marks hidden beneath decades of wear. Someone had removed this board before, then carefully fitted it back into place so perfectly that almost no trace remained. Ethan slowly sits back on his heels, saying nothing. Outside, morning sunlight climbs over the mountain ridge, filling the cabin with warm golden light while birds begin singing among the tall pines. The moving boxes stacked beside the front door suddenly seem unimportant. Tomorrow's sale feels strangely distant. Ranger quietly walks beside Ethan and gently rests his head against the veteran's shoulder for only a moment before looking once more toward the weathered floorboard. Ethan reaches down and strokes the thick fur along the dog's neck, then quietly smiles to himself. "All right, old friend," he says in a calm voice filled with trust instead of doubt. "Before anyone takes this cabin, we are going to find out why you never wanted me to leave this room behind." The cabin falls completely silent after Ethan speaks those quiet words. Even the wind outside seems to soften as morning sunlight spreads across the old pine floor, revealing every knot, scratch, and weathered grain that decades of family life have left behind. Ranger remains beside the same floorboard, watching Ethan with calm confidence rather than excitement. There is no frantic barking, no restless pacing, only the steady patience of a dog who has already waited long enough. Ethan walks into the small workshop behind the cabin and returns carrying a flat pry bar, a screwdriver, a carpenter's hammer, and an old canvas tool bag that once belonged to his father. The leather handle has grown smooth with age, and faint pencil marks still appear along one side where his father had measured boards during countless repair projects. Ethan pauses for a moment before placing the bag beside the fireplace. He suddenly remembers something unusual. Throughout his childhood, his father had repaired nearly every corner of the cabin himself, yet he had never once allowed anyone to replace or even inspect this particular section of flooring. At the time, Ethan had assumed his father simply preferred doing the work alone. Now the memory carries an entirely different weight. Kneeling carefully beside Ranger, Ethan slides the flashlight across the floor one more time. The narrow seams surrounding the board become clearer beneath the bright beam. Tiny tool marks, almost invisible beneath decades of dust and polished footsteps, form a nearly perfect rectangle. Someone had lifted this plank with remarkable care before fitting it back so precisely that even experienced carpenters might never notice the difference. Ethan gently inserts the flat edge of the pry bar into the smallest opening along the seam. He applies only enough pressure to test the wood. The board shifts almost imperceptibly. He immediately stops. Rather than forcing it, he carefully removes several old finishing nails with the screwdriver, noticing that each nail appears cleaner than those securing the surrounding floorboards. They had been replaced at some point long after the cabin had originally been built. Ranger quietly lowers himself onto the floor, resting his chin upon his front paws while never taking his eyes away from Ethan's hands. The peaceful trust in the dog's expression somehow settles Ethan's own thoughts. Slowly, with patient movements learned during years of repairing equipment in the Marine Corps, he lifts the weathered pine plank free without splintering the edges. Beneath it lies not empty soil, but a carefully constructed wooden compartment fitted neatly between the floor joists. Dust has settled naturally across the surface, yet the compartment itself remains remarkably clean, protected from moisture by tightly joined cedar boards. Ethan shines the flashlight inside. At first he sees only darkness. Then the beam catches the corner of something resting quietly at the bottom. He reaches down carefully and brushes away a thin layer of fine sawdust. A weathered olive-green metal container slowly comes into view. Its surface carries small patches of rust, yet the reinforced corners and heavy waterproof latches remain intact. Faded black lettering still clings to one side, though most of the paint has worn away with time. Ethan gently lifts the container from its hidden resting place. It is heavier than expected, suggesting something substantial remains inside. The moment the box clears the compartment, Ranger calmly stands and steps backward, almost as though his part of the task has been completed. Ethan carefully wipes away more dust using an old cotton cloth. Beneath the remaining dirt, one faded marking finally becomes readable in the growing morning light. United States Marine Corps Field Storage. His heartbeat slows instead of quickening. He does not feel excitement as much as quiet disbelief. Resting both hands upon the cool metal lid, Ethan looks toward the old family photograph hanging above the stone fireplace, where his father smiles beside a younger German shepherd many years earlier. For the first time since returning to the cabin, Ethan begins to wonder whether his father had never truly hidden this box from the world at all. Perhaps he had simply trusted that one faithful dog, someday, would know exactly when it was finally time for someone to find it. For several long moments, Ethan does not move. The weathered metal container rests across his knees while thin ribbons of morning sunlight spill through the cabin windows, turning floating dust into tiny golden sparks that drift silently through the still air. Ranger sits a few feet away beside the open floor compartment, his steady amber eyes fixed not on the container but on Ethan himself, as though this discovery has always belonged to the man rather than the dog. Ethan slowly brushes away another layer of dust with the same cotton cloth his father had once carried in his workshop apron. The faded olive paint becomes slightly clearer. Small scratches and years of storage have softened nearly every marking except the embossed Marine Corps emblem pressed into the steel beneath the worn finish. He carefully examines the heavy brass latches. Surprisingly, they show almost no corrosion. Whoever sealed the container had prepared it to survive many decades beneath the cabin floor. Ethan reaches into the canvas tool bag and removes a small bottle of light machine oil. He places a single drop on each hinge before waiting patiently. The familiar scent of oil mixes with cedar wood, old pine, and cool mountain air drifting through the slightly open window. Ranger quietly lowers his head but never closes his eyes. Ethan finally lifts the first latch. A soft metallic click echoes gently through the empty cabin. Then the second latch releases just as smoothly. He pauses again, taking a slow breath. Memories begin returning one after another. His father sitting beside this very fireplace after long days in the mountains. The older German shepherd lying faithfully at his boots. Conversations that always seemed to stop whenever Ethan entered the room as a curious young boy. At the time, he believed adults simply enjoyed private conversations. Now he wonders whether they had been protecting something far greater than ordinary family matters. Carefully, Ethan raises the heavy lid. The rubber weather seal resists for only a second before releasing with a quiet sigh. Inside, Everything remains astonishingly well preserved. Folded neatly across the top rests a dark green wool blanket protecting the contents beneath. Ethan gently lifts it away. Below lies a carefully organized collection of objects placed with unmistakable purpose rather than haste. The first item is a pair of polished military dog tags resting upon a folded American flag no larger than a hand towel. Beside them sits a thick bundle of handwritten letters tied together with faded brown leather cord. Several black and white photographs occupy one corner, their edges slightly curled with age but otherwise remarkably clear. A small leather-bound journal rests beneath the letters, its cover worn smooth from years of handling. In another compartment lies an old brass compass, a pocket knife with a carved walnut handle, and a neatly folded topographic map sealed inside transparent waterproof wrapping. Ethan reaches first toward the dog tags. The cool metal feels unexpectedly heavy in his palm. He slowly turns them over until sunlight catches the engraved lettering. The name brings an immediate smile touched with quiet sadness. Samuel Walker. His father. The service number beneath remains perfectly legible despite the passing decades. Ethan gently closes his eyes for a moment, remembering the calm voice that had guided him through childhood, teaching him patience, responsibility, and above all the importance of keeping promises even when nobody else remembered them. Ranger quietly rises and walks closer, stopping beside Ethan without touching the container. The German shepherd simply looks toward the leather journal before returning his gaze to Ethan. Almost instinctively, Ethan reaches for it. Tucked carefully beneath the front cover is a single cream-colored envelope. Across its surface, written in his father's unmistakable handwriting, are only 7 carefully formed words. For my son, when the dog is ready. Ethan sits quietly at the old dining table while the morning sun slowly climbs above the pine-covered ridge, filling the cabin with warm amber light. The unopened envelope rests in his hands with surprising weight despite containing only a few sheets of paper. Ranger lies peacefully beside the chair, his breathing slow and steady, occasionally lifting his eyes toward Ethan before returning them to the fireplace where the hidden compartment remains open. The entire cabin feels different now, as though the walls themselves have been waiting many years for this moment to arrive. Ethan carefully slides one finger beneath the envelope flap, taking great care not to tear the brittle paper. The faint scent of aged parchment and cedar rises gently into the air as he unfolds the first handwritten page. His father's familiar handwriting immediately fills the page with calm, steady lines that seem almost untouched by time. If you are reading this, son, then you listen when a faithful dog asked you to stop. That tells me everything I hope to know. Ethan quietly lowers his eyes and continues, reading while silence settles around him. The day will come when this cabin no longer belongs only to our family. Before that happens, there is something you deserve to understand. Everything inside this box belongs to people who chose kindness when nobody was watching. Their names were never meant to disappear, but neither were they meant to be found until the right heart opened this place. Ethan pauses, feeling his throat tighten. He glances toward Ranger, who remains perfectly still, watching him with calm patience. Beneath the letter lies the small leather journal. Ethan gently opens it and discovers that every page has been dated with remarkable precision. The earliest entries begin nearly 35 years earlier, written shortly after his father returned from military service. The journal contains careful notes describing mountain weather, supply deliveries, old forest trails, and visits from families whose names Ethan has never heard before. None of the entries speak about combat or conflict. Instead, they describe helping strangers find temporary shelter during dangerous winter storms, delivering food and medicine to isolated communities after severe flooding, and quietly assisting travelers who had nowhere else to go. Tucked between several pages are faded black and white photographs. One shows Samuel Walker standing beside a younger German shepherd nearly identical to Ranger. Another captures several smiling families gathered outside this very cabin beneath fresh mountain snow. Children wave toward the camera while Samuel kneels beside the dog, one hand resting gently on its shoulder. On the back of the photograph, a single sentence has been written in blue ink. Promises matter more when nobody keeps score. Ethan slowly turns another page and discovers a carefully folded list of names attached with a small brass paper clip. Beside each name appears a handwritten note, dates, and locations stretching across several western states. Every entry ends with the same brief phrase, "Safe." Ranger quietly stands and walks toward the open container once more. Instead of looking at the journal, he lowers his nose toward the sealed topographic map still, resting untouched inside the metal box. Ethan notices the movement immediately. The dog does not paw at the map or disturb it. He simply waits beside it with quiet certainty. Ethan gently places the journal back onto the table and reaches toward the waterproof map case. As he carefully lifts it into the morning light, he notices something he had overlooked before. Folded beneath the transparent cover is another smaller envelope bearing his father's handwriting. This one contains only 4 words. "Take this to Claire Bennett." The mountain road into town winds gently between towering pine forests and broad valleys still carrying patches of melting spring snow. Ethan drives slowly with both hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, while Ranger sits quietly beside him, watching the passing landscape through the open passenger window. Cool air carries the scent of cedar, fresh rain, and distant rivers into the aging pickup truck. The waterproof map case rests carefully on the seat between them, wrapped inside a folded wool blanket from the metal container. Ethan has not opened the second envelope. His father had written only 4 words, and somehow those words feel less like a request than a promise waiting to be completed. Nearly an hour later, the truck rolls into the quiet mountain town of Pine Creek, where brick storefronts line the main street beneath hanging flower baskets and old-fashioned street lamps. Ethan parks beside the county historical archives, a modest stone building surrounded by flowering dogwood trees whose white blossoms sway gently in the afternoon breeze. Ranger calmly steps from the truck and walks beside Ethan toward the entrance, drawing friendly smiles from several local residents who recognize the loyal German shepherd from previous visits around town. Inside, polished wooden floors and shelves filled with carefully preserved journals, maps, and photographs create an atmosphere of quiet respect for forgotten stories. Behind the front desk stands Claire Bennett, a woman in her early 40s whose patient eyes and thoughtful manner have earned the trust of nearly everyone who values local history. She looks up from a stack of restoration records and smiles warmly as Ethan enters. "I was beginning to wonder when you would finally visit again," she says gently. Ethan returns the smile, but says very little. Instead, he carefully places the waterproof map case upon the large oak research table before removing the small cream-colored envelope from beneath its protective cover. Claire notices the handwriting immediately. Her expression changes from friendly curiosity to quiet surprise. "Samuel Walker," she whispers softly. "I have not seen his handwriting in many years." Ethan slowly slides the envelope across the table without opening it. "My father wanted you to have this," he says. Claire hesitates for only a moment before carefully unfolding the letter. The room grows completely silent except for the quiet ticking of an antique wall clock. As she reads, her eyes slowly fill with emotion, though her hands remain steady. When she finishes, she gently places the letter beside the map and takes a slow breath. "Your father volunteered here after he returned home," she explains quietly. "Not every week, sometimes not even every month. But whenever families needed help tracing forgotten records, missing photographs, or old property documents, he always appeared without asking for recognition." Ethan listens carefully, hearing another chapter of his father's life for the very first time. Claire reaches into a nearby cabinet and removes a worn leather archive ledger. She carefully turns several pages before stopping beside a familiar signature. There, written in the same careful handwriting, Samuel Walker had left a final note years earlier. "If my son ever arrives with this map, help him finish what I could not." Claire gently closes the ledger before looking toward Ranger, who has quietly settled beside the research table with calm, attentive eyes. She smiles softly and shakes her head with quiet amazement. "Your father never told me when this day would come," she says. "He only smiled once and said that I would know because the right German shepherd would bring the right man through that door." Ethan slowly looks down at Ranger, who calmly lifts his head as though the journey has only just begun. Claire carefully unfolds the restored topographic map across the large oak research table, placing small archival weights at each corner so the brittle paper remains perfectly flat. Afternoon sunlight streams through the tall windows of the historical archives, illuminating faded contour lines, handwritten notes, and dozens of tiny pencil markings that have survived nearly 4 decades. Ethan stands beside her with quiet attention while Ranger rests calmly at his feet, his ears occasionally lifting whenever another page is turned. The map appears ordinary at first glance, showing mountain trails, rivers, abandoned logging roads, and old ranger stations scattered across western Montana. Then Claire notices something unusual. Several locations have been marked with tiny circles drawn in blue pencil, each accompanied by a date and a single handwritten initial. She opens Samuel Walker's journal beside the map and slowly compares every entry. The initials match names recorded throughout the journal, each one belonging to a family that had once found shelter at Ethan's cabin during dangerous winters, wildfires, or severe mountain storms. None of them had been soldiers. They were ordinary people whose homes had been destroyed, whose vehicles had failed on isolated roads, or whose lives had suddenly changed through circumstances beyond their control. Samuel had quietly organized volunteers who delivered food, blankets, medicine, fuel, and temporary shelter without asking for payment or recognition. Claire gently traces one finger across the map before looking toward Ethan with thoughtful eyes. "Your father never built a charity," she says softly. "He built something even quieter. He built trust." Ethan remains silent, absorbing every word. Claire continues examining the journal until she reaches one page marked by a pressed pine needle that has long since dried to a pale golden color. Beneath it, Samuel had written only a few careful sentences. Some promises should never become headlines. Kindness is strongest when the people receiving it never feel indebted. Ethan slowly closes his eyes for a moment, remembering how his father always seemed to disappear for several days during harsh winters, returning home exhausted but peaceful, never explaining where he had been. As a boy, Ethan had believed his father simply enjoyed long trips into the mountains. Only now does he begin understanding that those quiet absences had carried purpose. Claire opens another archival drawer and removes several preserved newspaper clippings from the same years documented in the journal. The articles describe isolated families mysteriously receiving emergency supplies during historic snowstorms when roads had become completely impassable. Local reporters never identified those responsible. One article simply called them unknown mountain volunteers. Claire smiles gently. "I always suspected your father knew more than he admitted." Ethan looks toward the old photographs spread across the table. In nearly every picture, the younger German shepherd stands beside Samuel Walker with the same calm posture and intelligent eyes that Ranger carries today. It is not merely a resemblance. It feels like a tradition quietly passed from one faithful companion to another across generations. Ranger slowly rises and walks toward the map. Instead of touching the marked locations, he pauses beside the lower right corner where the paper overlaps a folded sheet Ethan had not yet unfolded. The German shepherd simply sits and looks toward Ethan once again. Claire carefully lifts the corner of the map and discovers another handwritten page hidden beneath it. Across the top, Samuel had written one final instruction before carefully folding the paper many years ago. "If these names are ever remembered again, begin by visiting Eleanor Hayes. She still knows why the cabin was chosen." Late that afternoon, Ethan and Ranger leave the quiet streets of Pine Creek behind and follow a narrow county road that winds through rolling meadows, old fence lines, and endless stands of ponderosa pine. Claire has written the address on a small notepad, adding only a single sentence before handing it to Ethan. "Listen more than you speak." The drive takes nearly 40 minutes before the road narrows into packed gravel, leading toward a modest white farmhouse resting beneath enormous cottonwood trees. A weathered red barn stands nearby, surrounded by split-rail fences and fields where wildflowers sway gently beneath a cool mountain breeze. Sitting peacefully on the front porch is Eleanor Hayes, now well into her 80s, wrapped in a soft blue sweater despite the pleasant spring afternoon. Her silver hair catches the sunlight as she quietly rocks in an old wooden chair, a steaming cup of tea resting beside her. Before Ethan even reaches the porch steps, Ranger slows his pace. The German shepherd studies the elderly woman for a long moment, then calmly walks forward with relaxed ears and gentle eyes. Eleanor smiles warmly the instant she sees him. "Well," she says softly, "I wondered how many years it would take before another one came." Ethan pauses, surprised that she does not ask his name. Eleanor simply looks from Ranger to Ethan and nods as though greeting old friends who are arriving exactly on schedule. She invites them onto the porch, where the scent of fresh pine, blooming lilacs, and homemade bread drifts gently through the mountain air. Ethan carefully places Samuel's journal, the folded map, and several photographs upon the small wooden table between them. Eleanor reaches first for the oldest photograph, the one showing Samuel beside the younger German shepherd outside the cabin. Her fingertips rest lightly upon the faded image before she quietly smiles. "That was Scout," she whispers. "He found people before anyone else ever could." Ethan listens without interrupting. Eleanor explains that nearly 35 years earlier, severe winter storms had isolated dozens of families throughout the surrounding mountains. Roads disappeared beneath deep snow, telephone lines failed, and help often arrived too late. Samuel Walker never waited for official instructions. Working quietly with local volunteers, he transformed the cabin into a temporary refuge where frightened families found warmth, blankets, food, medicine, and hope until weather conditions improved. Nobody kept careful records because recognition had never been the goal. Scout always seemed to know which trail remained safe when snow buried every familiar landmark. Eleanor gently laughs through misting eyes. "Some people believed your father trained that remarkable dog. The truth is your father always insisted the dog trained him to pay closer attention." Ethan smiles quietly, recognizing the same patient wisdom he now sees every day in Ranger. Eleanor slowly opens the journal to its final handwritten pages before pointing toward a small passage Ethan had overlooked. "Read this one aloud," she says. Ethan clears his throat and quietly reads the words written by his father many years before. "If this journal is ever opened, remember that no cabin, no map, and no hidden box ever saved a single life by themselves. People did. Dogs simply reminded us where kindness was needed most." Silence settles gently across the porch as a light breeze stirs the surrounding cottonwood leaves. Ranger walks toward Eleanor, resting his head softly against her knee for only a moment before turning his attention toward the old photograph still lying upon the table. Eleanor gently strokes the dog's thick fur and looks toward Ethan with calm certainty. "There is one more place your father expected you to visit," she says quietly, "and I believe Ranger already knows exactly where it is." The sun hangs low above the western mountains as Ethan and Ranger leave Eleanor Hayes' farmhouse, carrying far more than a few old documents. They carry direction. The final place Samuel Walker had expected his son to visit lies only a few miles away, hidden beyond an abandoned Forest Service road that disappeared from official maps many years earlier. Eleanor had quietly pointed toward the distant ridge before they left, explaining that a small mountain chapel once stood there before harsh winters and passing decades slowly reclaimed the land. Samuel often stopped there after returning from long volunteer trips through the mountains, not because he attended regular services, but because it was the one place quiet enough to think before going home. Ranger remains unusually attentive throughout the drive. Sitting beside Ethan in the aging pickup truck, he watches every bend in the road with calm focus rather than restless anticipation. The narrow dirt road eventually becomes too rough for the vehicle, forcing Ethan to park beneath towering lodgepole pines whose branches filter the golden evening light into long ribbons across the forest floor. He carefully places Samuel's journal, the folded map, and the weatherproof container back inside the truck before slipping only the old compass into his jacket pocket. Somehow it feels right to carry something that once belonged to his father. Ranger steps confidently onto the trail ahead, never pulling away, never rushing, simply walking at a steady pace that allows Ethan to remain beside him. The forest is wonderfully still. Gentle wind moves through pine needles overhead, while distant songbirds greet the approaching evening. The scent of damp earth, moss-covered stones, and cedar bark fills every breath. After nearly 20 minutes of climbing, fragments of old stone walls slowly emerge between the trees. Ivy and wildflowers have claimed much of the abandoned chapel, yet one weathered wooden cross still stands quietly above the collapsed roofline. Ethan removes his hat without thinking, standing silently beside Ranger as both look across the peaceful clearing. Nature has transformed the forgotten place into something beautiful rather than abandoned. Ranger slowly walks toward a flat granite bench resting beneath an enormous pine tree. There he stops, lowers his nose, and gently sniffs the ground before sitting beside the stone without scratching or digging. Ethan notices a small bronze plaque fastened to the weathered bench, its lettering softened by years of mountain weather. He kneels and carefully brushes away pine needles covering the inscription. The words appear one line at a time beneath his fingertips, dedicated to those who quietly served neighbors without expecting their names to be remembered. Ethan reads the sentence twice before looking toward the surrounding clearing. There are no individual names engraved anywhere, only that simple dedication. He suddenly understands why his father chose this place. Recognition had never been the purpose. Quiet service had been enough. As Ethan rises, the old brass compass inside his jacket pocket slips loose and falls gently onto the granite bench. The lid springs open when it lands. Instead of focusing immediately on the compass needle, Ethan notices something tucked inside the hinged cover that had remained hidden all these years. Carefully folded beneath the glass is an impossibly thin piece of paper. He slowly removes it with careful fingers. It contains only a hand-drawn sketch showing the outline of the family cabin. One corner of the drawing has been marked with a small circle beside the handwritten words. The floor was only the beginning. Ethan looks from the note to Ranger, who calmly watches him with the same patient expression he carried beside the fireplace days earlier. The forest grows perfectly still around them as the last rays of sunlight filter through the tall pines. Ethan quietly folds the tiny note and slips it into his pocket. For the first time, he realizes that the hidden compartment beneath the cabin floor may never have been the final secret Samuel Walker intended his son to discover. Darkness settles gently across the mountain valley by the time Ethan and Ranger return to the cabin. The stars appear one by one above the towering pines while a cool breeze carries the familiar scent of cedar, wood smoke, and damp earth through the open porch. Ethan switches on the old lantern hanging beside the stone fireplace instead of using the electric lights. The soft amber glow spreads quietly across the cabin, illuminating the packed moving boxes, the open floor compartment, and the weathered pine boards that had silently protected their secret for so many years. Ranger walks directly toward the fireplace, but, unlike every previous day, he does not stop beside the open compartment. Instead, he slowly circles the room once before settling peacefully near the old bookshelf where Samuel Walker had always kept his journals and field guides. Ethan notices the change immediately. The dog is no longer asking him to look beneath the floor. His attention has shifted somewhere else. Ethan removes the tiny folded sketch from his pocket and carefully places it beside the original map. The hand-drawn outline of the cabin appears remarkably accurate despite its simplicity. The small circle marking one corner of the building does not match the location beneath the fireplace where the hidden container had been found. Instead, it points toward the northern wall beside the built-in bookshelf. Ethan studies the drawing several times before walking slowly across the room. The shelves are filled with decades of family history. Old wildlife guides, military memoirs, fishing journals, carpentry manuals, weather almanacs, and dozens of worn novels stand neatly arranged exactly as his father had left them. Ethan begins removing each book one at a time, laying them carefully upon the nearby table. Dust has gathered naturally behind most of the shelves, yet near the center he notices something unusual. One vertical pine board appears slightly lighter than the surrounding wood, protected from sunlight for many years by a narrow wooden frame. He gently runs his fingers along its edges until he discovers an almost invisible recessed wooden peg hidden beneath the lower shelf. Curious, he presses it gently. A soft click answers from inside the wall. Nothing dramatic happens. Instead, the narrow panel slowly loosens by less than half an inch. Ethan carefully grips the edge and slides the concealed section aside. Behind it is not another large compartment, but a shallow cedar niche no larger than a briefcase. Inside rests only a single polished oak box, beautifully crafted and untouched by dust. Ranger quietly rises and walks beside Ethan, his tail moving slowly with calm satisfaction. Ethan lifts the wooden box from its resting place and notices a brass plaque fastened to the lid. Unlike the military container beneath the floor, this box bears no official markings. Only one carefully engraved sentence appears beneath the polished surface. Legacies belong in open hands. Ethan gently opens the lid. Inside are dozens of neatly organized envelopes, each addressed to a different family whose names appear throughout Samuel's journal. Every envelope contains original photographs, handwritten letters, small keepsakes, and carefully documented memories meant for people who had never known these personal treasures had been preserved. Resting across the very top lies one final letter addressed simply, "To whoever chooses kindness next." Ethan quietly smiles as emotion fills his eyes. He finally understands why his father never wanted recognition. The hidden compartments had never been created to hide valuable possessions. They had protected hope until someone was ready to return it to the people who truly deserved it. Ranger gently rests his head against Ethan's arm as both sit quietly before the open oak box, knowing that tomorrow would no longer be about selling an old cabin. It would become the beginning of returning forgotten pieces of countless families back to where they had always belonged. Morning arrives wrapped in gentle mountain fog, and for the first time in many years, Ethan does not begin his day by thinking about leaving the cabin behind. Instead, he stands on the front porch with a warm cup of coffee resting between his hands while Ranger lies quietly beside the wooden steps, watching sunlight slowly spill across the pine-covered valley. The moving boxes remain exactly where they had been stacked, but now they seem to belong to another life entirely. Inside the cabin, the oak memory box, Samuel Walker's journal, the preserved photographs, and the carefully addressed envelopes rest neatly upon the large dining table, waiting for their journey to continue. Shortly after sunrise, Claire Bennett arrives carrying archival storage cases, cotton preservation gloves, and a portable document scanner. She steps inside the cabin slowly, taking a long look around before quietly smiling. "Your father protected more than history," she says. "He protected people's dignity." Together, they begin opening the envelopes one by one. Each contains something deeply personal. A faded family photograph once believed lost forever. A handwritten recipe passed down through generations. Letters of gratitude that had never reached their intended recipients. Drawings made by children during frightening winter storms while they waited safely inside the cabin. Every item has been carefully labeled in Samuel's unmistakable handwriting, including dates, locations, and the names of the families who should one day receive them. Claire works patiently, creating digital copies while Ethan carefully places every original document back into acid-free preservation sleeves. Ranger quietly moves from person to person, occasionally resting beside the table before walking to the front window, as though standing watch over the peaceful work unfolding inside. By early afternoon, Claire begins contacting several names still traceable through county records. Some families have moved across the country. Others remain only a few towns away. The first visitor arrives before sunset. An elderly couple steps slowly onto the porch after receiving Claire's unexpected telephone call. Neither knows exactly why they have been invited. Ethan welcomes them inside with quiet kindness before placing a small envelope into the woman's trembling hands. She carefully opens it and immediately covers her mouth with emotion. Inside rests a photograph of her parents standing beside the cabin during the winter of 1989, smiling beside Samuel Walker and the original German Shepherd Scout. She quietly whispers that every copy of this photograph had been lost decades earlier when their family home was damaged by flooding. Her husband gently unfolds another sheet of paper and discovers a handwritten letter from Samuel thanking their family for teaching local volunteers how to preserve food during difficult winters. Tears fill both their eyes, not from sadness but from gratitude. Ethan watches silently, finally understanding why his father believed these keepsakes belonged in open hands instead of hidden boxes. Before leaving, the elderly man walks toward Ranger, kneels carefully despite his aching knees, and gently scratches behind the dog's ears. "Your friend finished what another faithful dog started," he says softly. Ranger calmly leans into the gentle touch before returning to Ethan's side. As evening settles across the mountains once again, several more telephone calls have already been answered. More families are preparing to visit during the coming days. The cabin that Ethan nearly sold has quietly transformed into a place where forgotten memories are finding their way home. Standing beside the stone fireplace, Ethan looks toward the open floor where the hidden compartment has now been carefully restored. The weathered pine board fitted back into place exactly as his father once left it. Nothing about the room appears different to an ordinary visitor. Yet everything inside the cabin has changed forever, including the man who finally understands why one faithful German shepherd refused to let him walk away. The weeks that follow pass with a quiet rhythm unlike anything Ethan has experienced since leaving military service. Every few days, another vehicle slowly climbs the winding mountain road toward the cabin, carrying families from different towns, different generations, and different walks of life. Some arrive holding only faded memories. Others come carrying old stories handed down by parents and grandparents who never fully explained how strangers had once appeared during the darkest winter nights with blankets, warm meals, medicine, and hope. Ethan welcomes every visitor with the same calm kindness his father once offered so freely. Claire Bennett carefully documents each reunion while preserving digital copies of every letter, photograph, and journal entry before returning every original keepsake to the family whose name had patiently waited upon the envelope for so many years. Laughter gradually begins replacing silence inside the old cabin. Children quietly explore the stone fireplace, while grandparents recognize familiar corners where they once slept safely as frightened young boys and girls. One elderly woman gently touches the weathered kitchen table before smiling through grateful tears. She softly remembers helping Samuel bake fresh bread there during a blizzard when every road had disappeared beneath 6 feet of snow. Another man carefully unfolds a handwritten letter from his late father, reading words he never knew existed until this very day. Every reunion feels gentle rather than dramatic, as though time itself has simply been waiting for the right season to complete unfinished conversations. Throughout it all, Ranger moves peacefully among the visitors. He accepts every gentle hand placed upon his head with calm dignity before quietly returning to Ethan's side. Something about him has changed. The quiet urgency that once guided every step through the cabin has disappeared completely. He no longer pauses beside the fireplace. He no longer watches the hidden bookshelf or waits near the restored floorboard. Instead, he spends long afternoons resting beneath the old pine tree overlooking the valley, lifting his head only to greet each arriving family before lying comfortably once again in the warm mountain sunshine. Ethan notices the difference immediately. One peaceful evening after the final visitors leave, he carries 2 rocking chairs onto the porch and sits beside Ranger as the sky slowly turns shades of gold, crimson, and deep blue above the endless forest. The air smells of cedar, wildflowers, and fresh rain drifting across the mountains. Crickets begin their evening song, while distant elk calls softly from somewhere beyond the valley. Ethan gently scratches behind Ranger's ears and quietly smiles. "You knew," he whispers. "You carried this long before I understood it." Ranger slowly lifts his head and rests it across Ethan's knee exactly as Scout had once rested beside Samuel in the old photographs. There is no sadness in the moment, only peace. Ethan reaches into his pocket and unfolds the final letter addressed to whoever chooses kindness next. He reads it one last time before placing it carefully inside a new wooden display case that now rests above the stone fireplace. The words are simple enough for every future visitor to understand. If this place ever teaches you anything, let it remind you that kindness becomes a legacy only when someone chooses to continue it. Ethan quietly looks across the valley where evening light settles over the mountains that had protected so many hidden stories. He finally realizes the greatest inheritance his father left behind was never hidden beneath the cabin floor or inside a wooden wall. It was the quiet decision to trust another faithful heart when reason alone could not explain why. 1 full year passes, and the old mountain cabin no longer waits in silence. Every season leaves its own gentle mark upon the surrounding forest. Spring returns with wildflowers scattered across the meadows. Summer fills the valleys with birdsong and warm sunlight. Autumn paints the towering pines with golden light each evening, and winter once again lays quiet blankets of snow across the roof that Samuel Walker built so many years before. Yet the cabin remains exactly where it has always stood, not as a forgotten building hidden among the mountains, but as a place where ordinary kindness continues finding new life. Families still arrive throughout the year, following winding roads that once carried only uncertainty. Some bring children eager to hear stories about the veteran who trusted his faithful German shepherd. Others arrive carrying old photographs that now have names, dates, and memories restored because one hidden collection finally found its way back into open hands. Claire Bennett helps preserve every document with careful respect, while adding each family's newly shared memories to the growing historical archive, ensuring that future generations will understand not only what happened there, but why quiet acts of compassion mattered so deeply. Ethan Walker no longer thinks about selling the cabin. Instead, he repairs weathered porch boards, replaces aging roof shingles, plants young pine trees beside the driveway, and keeps the fireplace warm whenever visitors arrive during cold mountain afternoons. Nothing about the cabin has become grand or extraordinary. It remains simple, welcoming, and honest, just as Samuel intended. The restored floorboard blends perfectly with the surrounding wood once again, and the hidden compartments remain empty by choice. Their purpose was never to hold secrets forever. Their purpose was to protect hope until the right time arrived. Ranger grows older too. Small patches of gray begin appearing around his muzzle, and his walks become slower, though his calm amber eyes never lose their quiet wisdom. Every morning he still follows Ethan onto the porch, where both sit together watching mist rise from the valley while sunlight slowly reaches the distant mountain peaks. Sometimes visitors ask Ethan how the remarkable German shepherd knew where to search inside the cabin. Ethan always smiles before gently shaking his head. "I still do not know," he quietly answers. "I only know that trusting him changed more lives than trusting myself ever could." One peaceful evening, as golden light settles across the forest for another beautiful sunset, Ethan places Samuel's journal beside the display case above the stone fireplace. Nearby rests the final letter inviting every future visitor to choose kindness next. Ranger slowly walks into the center of the room, looks once toward the restored floor, then toward the hidden bookshelf, before calmly returning to lie beside Ethan's favorite chair. He closes his eyes with complete peace, as though every promise carried across 2 generations has finally been fulfilled. Ethan gently rests one hand upon the faithful dog's shoulder while listening to the familiar sounds of wind moving softly through the towering pines outside. Nothing inside the cabin asks to be discovered anymore. Every hidden truth has already become shared memory. Every forgotten name has found its way home. Every carefully protected keepsake now rests where it always belonged. As darkness settles quietly beyond the windows and the first evening stars appear above the mountains, Ethan understands one final lesson his father never needed to write inside any journal. The greatest treasures are never the things hidden beneath old floors or behind secret walls. They are the faithful hearts willing to protect hope until someone else is ready to believe in it. And sometimes, when the world has forgotten where to begin, all it takes is trusting one loyal dog one last time.